right, welcome back. Talk
Hey.
about the show to have a problem. Be in the church and be real.
We're real
Could we be
today.
real right now?
Yeah.
Our technology is acting the fool. So
Right, right,
we
right.
stopped, we prayed about it, and now we're back. Hopefully, everything should be okay. Doc Henry, I tell you, it is this technology not only helps us, it could also hinder us.
Yes, it can. Yes, it can. And I think we're still buffering a little bit now. I don't know if it's my end, your end, but you know what?
So,
We're gonna get through
right
this, right?
now, Pastor Paul is not with us. He is stepped away for the mic. We're gonna have to. All right. So, hopefully they hit the record button. It's working great. No more interruptions. That's what we're seeing now. So that's awesome. So listen, today our show is being the church, and being real. And we have with us two wonderful guests that are involved in being real in their own context. As I shared before, you probably did not hear or it was distorted. We have with us Pastor John Boston the second, who is associate director at the North American Division uh, uh, Evangelism Institute. We affectionately call NADI. He is here with us. You'll see him in a minute. And we also have with us Dr. Gary Kraus, the director of the Office of Adventist Missions for the General Conference. So we're welcoming, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being with us. Sorry about the interruption. Hopefully, the restart would help us and get us going on that. So, Dr. Henry, why don't you pray one more time and then let's get right into it.
All right. Well, let's pray. Father, we know we're experiencing some difficulties today, but we just believe that you're still in charge. So we ask God that you will help us to not only get through our discussion today, but help it to be clear so that the viewers and ourselves can learn from this discussion on how to be real as a church. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. God be praised. All right, Doc Henry, let's go.
Hey, we gonna start from. We
Start
just
from
listen. Let's just ask questions. That we gonna keep it real today. We're asking questions today, so that
well, I just want to make sure we just want to make sure that everyone knows where the platform we're at, and we want to, the question basically was that question is some of us claim the relevance. We could see the relevance of the message, and then we say, hey, the people of faith. What is being real? I think we had a very good answer the last time. Hopefully, we'll get it again.
right. Okay, so let's
I'm the only one here at this point, so
right. If you, we need help from the general conference now. Talk to us. So let. Oh, okay. We have Pastor Boston is back. Good to see you. But can you let us know, Pastor Dr. Gary Krause, about just this bait and switch we talked about? When we do evangelism, Pastor Wade already asked the question. I don't want to, re-ask it. But what do you think about that?
I actually have a challenge with the way the question is framed, because the question of doing evangelism as if it's an event. And I've actually got a little bit wary of actually using the word evangelism, because when I use it, it's almost like default that church members think, oh, this is an event that we do in our church 2 or 3 times a year, and that's what evangelism is. Whereas evangelism, of course, comes from the meaning of being a carrier, a bearer of good news. And that's not something you do for a few weeks, 3 or 4 times a year. That's something that you are. That's something that is your way of life. And so I talk about living a life on mission. Now, of course, there's going to be certain events, but when you're living your life on mission, there's no such thing as bait and switch, because what you see is what you get. That's why I also have a bit of a challenge with what we call Visitors' Day at church. We do that maybe once a quarter. Well, for me, every day should be Visitors' Day, Guest Day. Why do we only put on our best smiles and make sure that we have our best greeters at the door and our best music for Visitors' Day? No, we want to be a place that is open and welcoming every week. So on the bait and switch, I'm actually a little bit unfamiliar with the culture of these evangelistic events because we don't do this in Australia. As John will know, when we do a public evangelism program, it's usually in a neutral venue. It's never in a church. It's usually in a town hall or some other meeting venue because we're not going to get visitors from the general public who will come into a church building. And so we don't have singing because the secular community is not used to singing, and that's going to be a barrier to them. So I'm not actually familiar with the culture that brings forth this question, but I do think that we have to be very careful with bait and switch. I remember hearing back in the 70s in Australia, they developed some Bible guides that were done in very psychedelic colors and terrific design, etc., to aim at the hippies, the alternative people, and they went out street preaching and they handed out these up-tempo, with the times, well-designed brochures. But then when people arrived at church, it was totally different than the advertising. So we have to make sure that there is a connection. So I get the general gist of the problem.
Well,
Yes.
Pastor
You just hit it on the head.
if you take your phone, I think you're on mute. I don't know if you're still on mute there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate what you're saying, Gary. I think too, one of the challenges we face is that we don't have to disavow the practices of evangelism from the past. We need to make sure they evolve. And when I say evolve, I'm talking about grow into the pattern that Christ set for us, the pattern of great mission work. In the Western context, what I find is that evangelism has become a negative word. And people don't want to hear it. They don't want to talk about it because it has been equated to an event. But for me, I don't think we should go on the other end of the spectrum and then not have events. Events should be a part of a culture of evangelism, an environment of evangelism. I was sharing just before we restarted here that we often measure the success of evangelism based on how many people come and how often they come or respond. But what if we instead measured evangelism on the effectiveness of the church in connecting with people? What if in our board meeting we measured how well did you connect with Roger Wade? How many connection points does he have? And build a map and hold accountability. What about Gary? What about John? And talk through each person that we come in contact with and identify how many home visits or calls did they get that weren't related to a Bible study. Because we determined that evangelism is Bible study, and Bible study is only one part of evangelism. We think that we have failed, and you can't fail in loving people. And that's the heart of what evangelism is. You have to love people. And when people don't make a decision, you still continue to journey with them. And that's how you act in transformation and not transaction when it comes to evangelism. When I was pastoring in Ohio, we baptized 187 people over a 36-month period. Ask me how many public evangelism meetings did I run?
How many?
0.
All right.
Not one single tent, one hall, not one series. What we did was we decided that we were going to serve and love, and we were going to give everything we had, and we did that effectively. And in doing so, people wanted to follow. I don't like when we act as though evangelism should not have results. It should have results because the ministry of Christ and the apostles had results. People made decisions to follow after him. But at the same time, we can not only measure by the events, they have to be a part of everything else that's going on. And when you do those things together, you get a whole different environment, and that produces a different outcome.
All right. Listen, I really resonate with that. I really enjoy that comment, turning the church, instead of being event-centered, having the church become the Evangelistic Center every week and having programs connected to make that happen. But let me ask you a question. Is there a place for a public evangelistic meeting outside of the normal church week to week program? And of course, now we're talking about what happened pre-pandemic, and then also wanting to get your input on how that will translate to during the pandemic. So again, is there a place for a special event outside of the normal week-to-week program, which we would call public, a special public evangelism, and then how will that be in place or impact now during a pandemic?
I don't know, Gary, give me a chance to jump in on this. I say yes. I say there is a place, but we have to reconsider how we approach it now. I just partnered with the Oregon Conference to produce something called Max Life Events. They've created this platform, and they're able to track and support people all the way through the journey. And in my first mini series, it's 8 parts, and the entire series I'm sharing about being adopted, the rejection that I faced in my childhood, not being able to come back home and pastor where I wanted to serve, or having to deal with infertility after being adopted, wanting to quit my job, having a traumatic brain injury after a car accident. Are people making decisions? Yes, absolutely. But it is a totally different approach to the public proclamation. I am proclaiming Jesus Christ. Can we do that and still share the doctrines? Yes, we can. But we have to consider that the gospel is not information, it is transformation. And the best way to do that in the times we're living in, I believe, is to simply share that I'm on this journey as well. And this is what Christ has done in my life. The truth as information cannot change us. The truth as transformation is what is impactful to people. And let me just go back one time, and I'll shut up for a couple of moments here. When we look at this idea that there's bait and switch evangelism, and we present something that's not accurate, the only way to remedy that be authentic in all the phases of our ministries. And I think that the way to do that is all of our ministries that are working in our church should be evangelistic. Someone in the feed asked, how did we do that? We did not fund anything that was not specifically designed to reach people that were not a part of our church. And we have to get away from working with pre-processed believers. I particularly try to focus on people that have no faith experience. And that's where I shine. And I think that there are more people like that than those that actually have a faith experience. And we need to focus there.
For me, the question of is there a place for public events? Of course there is. My question is, does it need the central role that it plays in the Seventh-day Adventist Church at the moment? Because when you look at the landscape of what we are doing in mission, public evangelism rates right at the top. The resources, the time, there's a number of reasons for that. One is it's worked so well in the past. 2, church members don't have to get involved. You can bring in the expert to do it, and it's only for a limited amount of time. And so when we look at Christ's method of ministry, as summarized by Ellen White, she talks about several components. The Savior mingled. The Savior showed sympathy. He ministered to needs. He won confidence, and he bid people to follow Jesus. We are experts in number 5. We are experts in the bidding, in the proclamation, in the seminars, in the books, in the literature, and we are very limited in the other aspects of investing the time in the mingling, the showing the sympathy, the ministering to the needs. So what happens is that we sabotage Christ's method of ministry because we do not bring in a holistic emphasis, but we emphasize the proclamation and the proclamation only. So yes, of course we need public evangelism events, but as John has said, it needs to be within a wider context of mission, of ministry, because and we need to make sure that we realize that when we talk to our church members, we say that There are 150 million different ways that you can be involved in mission, not just preaching. And you may not feel the call to get to the public platform, but as a builder, as a nurse, as a doctor, as an engineer, you are just as important as the pastor who stands at the public platform, because you have a sphere of influence during the week that nobody else has. And Anselm was saying that he likes data. Well, I dug up some data for him. According to the Global Church Member Survey, 28% of Adventists around the world who responded to the survey said that they had been involved in some sort of church ministry during the week, at least once a week during the past year. So 28% of all church members are involved in any type of church ministry. Then when you get to how many church members are involved in the community, about 20% said that they help meet the needs of people in the community once a week or more. The most popular response was 24% who said we met the needs of someone once or twice during the past year. So we have a culture of non-involvement. That is our challenge. We have a culture of non-involvement. So we need to rediscover the holistic mission that Ellen White talked about in summarizing Christ's method of ministry. And in doing that, we need to tell each of our church members, each of our lay people, that their involvement is just as important as that of the pastor.
Wow. Well, listen, you brought up a good point. You bring up a good point there, because I remember when I moved from one coast to the next in my ministry, there was a difference in the way they embraced evangelism. So on one coast, they were very excited. They were busy. I don't want to say they were real, but they were busy in doing evangelism. And we had a few good numbers in terms of baptisms. But when I went to the other coast, they were willing to just throw money at it and not get involved themselves, because the culture of how we promote events. When I was in school, you took a public evangelism course. And if you didn't incorporate some of those things into your ministry, you would be looked at as if you are from Mars with 3 heads. And so we tend to just
there's that Roger
kind of
again.
Yeah, I think your feast
yes,
Roger.
Something we do. We check it off, and I think our membership. Oh wow, okay. But anyway, I hope you heard what I said. My picture may have frozen, but I hope you.
I think.
What I said. Actually, what I'm trying to say is, I think some of this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that I'm posting. I just posted a statistic here from Lifeway Research, and one of the things that we have to acknowledge. Wayne mentioned this. Is we talked about lay people and clergy, and we there was a differentiation of who should be involved and how they should be involved. C.D. Brooks said this to me once. We do not have a crisis in membership. We have a crisis in leadership. And I think that crisis reflects the level of engagement that's practiced in our local churches. 2/3 of all American churches are experiencing one of two things, or both. They're experiencing no growth and a decline in the number of persons that are actively involved in their ministry. I think that we would all agree that there are some leaders that are able to catalyze the members to get involved in a fresh new way. And I think that as leaders, this is the Pastors Roundtable, I know that everyone's watching, but we have to ask ourselves, what are we going for? How big is our goal? And I have found in my personal journey in travel that too often we see ourselves as pastors in the Adventist church, and we consider our success based on what the Adventist community thinks of us.
Mhm.
But what if, as leaders, we considered our success on our ability to impact the cities that we serve? What if we did not measure the number of followers on our social media who were Adventists, but we measured it by the number of persons who were looking for answers about their spiritual questions? What if we measured it based on our ability to serve our mayors and serve our police departments and our fire departments and social entities that are trying to make a difference in the world? I think that we would be better served as seeing ourselves as pastors of the communities and not just pastors of our congregations.
I think that's a really interesting point. The pastor, not limiting yourself, but in the four walls of the church,
It's a
expanding it and see. So, what would be your suggestion? We have a couple of questions here we definitely want to get to, but just to follow that frame of thinking, your suggestion to a pastor that is assigned to a district. So you have a district, you have two churches, and they are 50 miles, and we are in a pandemic. How can we fulfill what you have just suggested, being a pastor to two communities when we're pastoring in a district that are the churches are far apart?
Gary, did you want to? Sorry, I can pick up a little bit.
Sure. Well, I think, again, I go back to what are the expectations that we give to our church members? Are we asking them to use the spiritual gifts that God has given, or are we asking them to jump through hoops that make them uncomfortable? So, I like to talk about influence, which are urban centers that are platforms for putting Christ's method of ministry into practice. And there may be somebody who has sat in your church for the last 25 years and never been involved in mission because they don't like knocking on doors or giving Bible studies. But if you give them an opportunity to run a seminar at a center of influence on how to balance your budget, how to help single mothers to make their to be able to cope during the week financially, then they are bringing their gifts and their skills and their talents to the floor. They're doing mission and ministry, but they're not feeling forced into something that makes them uncomfortable or that they can't do. So I think we need to challenge every one of our church members to be involved, but to be involved within the framework of how God has gifted them. Let's not ask them to do something that is going to be so painful and foreign to them that they're never going to do it.
I think that I mentioned earlier we created something called connection points, and it's a vitality matrix to measure the church's ability to reach the world outside of the church. It can be difficult. I went to Adventist camps, Adventist school, Adventist college. The first time I went to an Adventist institution was in my master's program at Claremont Lincoln University, and then even that I served in Adventist community. For me, it was a struggle to break outside of that bubble. It's a bubble. And we have general conference, camp meeting, or big camp. We have festivals of the laity, all of these things. Every one of us is more immediately connected in this environment. And so how do you do that? I want to give a specific example. Your Sabbath school leaders should consider themselves unsuccessful if the conversation in the Sabbath school class is designed only for members. It should be able to reach people that are not members. Our youth program, our Pathfinder ministry was funded in part by the state because we marketed it to the public school system. And we said we have a youth mentor program called Pathfinders. And these are some of our former Pathfinders. They are pastors and lawyers and teachers and doctors. And we created a whole new metric to measure Pathfinders. We said that it's not successful if 50% of the Pathfinder Club are not members. That had to be a part of it. Our worship experience was no longer designed with us in mind. Our board meetings were for evangelism planning. And I'm saying that I'm giving specific examples, but I'm measuring this in 3 ways. Every ministry of your church should be Great Commission oriented, meaning it should reach people that are not a part of the church. It should be spiritual, and it should have a spiritual nurture component. And thirdly, it should be collaborative, meaning you can't have ministries in your church that one person is in charge of and nobody can touch. If you have somebody like that in your church, you've got a bigger problem. And you've just got to devitalize leadership structure. And so what you have to do is create collaboration in every phase of ministry. Our children's ministry was not just for the children of the church. It was for the children of the city. We bust children in. Our city had a childhood hunger problem. And so we addressed that. And we measured our church, and I'm done here on this point. We measured our church on what difference we could make in the city, not what difference we could make in our church.
So watch this. Very good comment. So the mission of our church is derived from Matthew 28, Revelation chapter 14. What is your assessment of how the church is fulfilling their mission before pre-pandemic, and how the church is fulfilling the mission during the pandemic? Talk to Pastor Gary. What's your assessment on this?
Well, I think, I think that what has happened with the pandemic coming is that we've had to change our methodology somewhat. And the temptation has now been even stronger for us to move toward the proclamation, because we can't really do a whole lot of the mingling because the public health advice is not to do that. So that's one of the dangers, is that when we come off this, that we have to be very careful that we don't just think that, now that we've got Skype and Zoom and all these wonderful electronic things, that we can do our mission. I remember a statement by E. Cleveland that he used a military metaphor. He said, I've never known any battle, any war to be won by the Air Force alone. You need the ground troops.
Okay.
So media is wonderful, and I believe in television and internet and social media and all that sort of stuff. But if we don't have church members who are involved, as Pastor John has said, involved in the community, outward looking, then we're going to be making a big mistake. And we don't want to get to the stage where we think we can sit in our lounge rooms and do 25 seminars on the internet and we've done our mission. I remember a few years ago there was a supporting ministry that sent out an email raising funds for their literature ministry, good literature ministry. But basically they said, you can send us the money and you can do your witnessing from the comfort of your own home. Send the check and we'll do your mission for you. So you can start outsourcing your evangelism by sending a check. That's the danger of media, is that we start seeing this as the answer to all. But again, that is only one facet of Christ's method of ministry. We can't ignore the rest.
Okay. Pastor Boss, I was gonna follow with the question. So Pastor Boston, I mean, you're in the North American division. How's the church doing before the pandemic in fulfilling the mission? And I like what Pastor Gary said. Getting involvement, and we're right now focused on the media. But how are we doing now? When you look at fulfilling the mission, how are we doing now as a church in the North American division?
Anecdotally, just from examples that I have seen across the division, some people are struggled in the beginning to find their footing. But there are some dynamic examples of tremendous success. For instance, I want to bring up one friend of mine. I hate to do this because it seems like I have partiality to Australians, but I do love them. But his name is Nick Kute. He's tuning in now. He's at the Adventist Fellowship in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They recently they baptized 15 people because of their ability to connect well with the community on an ongoing basis. And so he's created online community. I just shared a link in the feed. You can see that from NAD Ministerial, written by a friend of mine, Jose Cortez. And I hope you all get him on here at some point if he hasn't already been. I think I've seen them all. I haven't seen them on. But he talks about different ways to engage, and we're seeing a lot more engagement. But let me tell you another story about a pastor over in Oregon. They decided to reach out to their young people and engage with them on Zoom and Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter. And 9 of those young people were recently baptized over in Washington State. I'm sorry. I'm working with Max Life Events. We've got dozens and dozens and dozens of people that have already registered, and churches can sign up and be a part and share this in their communities where we take a testimony approach to the proclamation. And so in that sense, we're doing well. In the sense that we're not doing well, we have more content. But in many instances, we are not seeing results, meaning people are not saying, I'd like to be a follower of Jesus Christ. And that is partly because we're not making the appeal. And I think that's the danger. And I don't know if you agree with me on this or not, Dr. Gary, but I think the danger in avoiding evangelism because of what it means to so many people is that now people don't want anything to do with it. And instead of re-owning that term and engaging, people don't want to make an appeal. And a lot of our pastors are not making appeals. And I think if we saw more appeals after a Bible study online or after a message online, I think we see a lot more people making decisions. We have, I think, less decisions because we're having less appeals. But across North America, there's a lot of phenomenal innovation. Across in Bermuda and Canada, there's some really amazing things out there. Zach over in Wisconsin conference, I can't remember his last name right now. Think of it. Brilliant job connecting all 3 of his churches, and he just has a new district now. But just some amazing things are happening across Northern. Rowan Wellington over in the Atlantic Union up north. Brilliant job there with some of the work he's doing. And so I would say we're finding our way on this.
All right. Hey, I'm
Okay.
sorry. You guys have been seeing me dip in and out right quick. So, and I'm kind of a part of a couple of different things going on right here. But there's a question that came up. I want to address that right quick. And then I got another question. This one comes from End Time Revelations. Let's see if we can get it up on the screen here. It says, sorry, pastors, the church is cowering based on the government mandates. All I know the Great Commission is to go out. You cannot baptize virtually. You can't pray and feed the homeless virtually. Stop being afraid and do thus saith the Lord. Too much focus on the media, pandemics, and masks. There's a whole lot in there. I'm just going to focus on the one. If you guys want to pick up any of the other things, can we baptize anybody virtually?
Yeah, I just baptized 8 people in Brazil as I was preparing to get on here. 2 people in the U.S. Virgin Islands last week. And so, yes, it can be done. It can be done in a socially distanced way, in a very safe way. And I think that I don't want to major in a minor here. The minor issue, some of these things are minor issues. The major issue is our mission has not stopped. Our mission has not changed. And we have to find ways to accomplish the mission God has given us. And we have to be socially responsible while we exercise spiritual authority.
Cool. So some of those things that we're seeing the nation and really the world having to go through, you're saying that doesn't stop us from doing the work that we're called to do.
It doesn't stop us. As a matter of fact, the light of God shines best in the darkness of this world. And so this is the best time when during the Great Plague in North Africa, the Cyprian plague, one of the Bishop of Carthage said of the Christians, when 5,000 people a day were dying in Rome, they said they don't even die like the rest of us. You can tell that they have joy in the way that they carry their dead because of the promise of their resurrection. And I think that for us in this worldwide plague, we have to understand that the world is looking for hope and light, and we have it now more than ever before.
Awesome.
But I think on this right at this moment we talk about a virtual. The question was, could we baptize virtually? Could we do things? I think we've spent too much time on virtual, and we try to make make it like it's a different thing. There is no way you can virtually baptize. Somebody had to be in the pool to take them under and take them up. So there is no such thing as virtual. What we are trying, what is being focused on is the word to make it seem like it's different. When the church, one of my colleagues said they're going to do a virtual communion, that kind of threw me for a little bit as a traditionalist in the level that I've been doing ministry all my life. And so but I had to think about that. What that did for me was allow me as a pastor and the priest of my home to have communion at my house. And I was now the pastor of my family, made my communion bread, got my communion wine, and we sat around the table and had communion. Now, the church may have done it together, quote unquote, virtually, but there was a physicality to it. And I think people do the church a disservice trying to make it sound like we're doing things so different and so great that we got all of a sudden we're virtual. We're virtually meeting. We're virtually having this. We're virtually having that. But it actually is, there is still a middling involved.
And I think that's the challenge with nomenclature. Just like when you say evangelism, it means so many different things to so many different people. When you say virtual for leaders, I think for leaders and pastors that may be tuning in, what you're saying is you're mitigating the risk to the members that you provide care for, and you're mitigating risk to the community that you serve by keeping as many people at home as possible and only participating with a very few, maybe 10 or less or 20 or less, depending on the locale. And I think that's when you say virtual, you're talking about mitigating the risk.
Right.
Absolutely.
Good point.
So, gentlemen, we kind of want to move just a little bit into what you guys do. John, let's start with you. You are the Associate Director for one of the Adventist acronyms, NADI, N-A-D-E-I. Tell us just a little bit about NADI, what it does, how it operates, and how does that impact evangelism and mission in a real way in 2020?
Well, the North American Division Evangelism Institute serves North America in particularly two ways. We provide the field education in the practical and applied theology department of the Adventist Theological Seminary for pastors and chaplains. So we make sure that field education is in place, the theological field education or advanced ministry development of every pastor who comes to the Adventist Theological Seminary, one of the best seminaries in the world. They go through the North American Division Evangelism Institute. Secondly, we support unions, conferences, churches, and pastors and members, all of North America, with evangelism training and support. I'm going to be hosting a very large virtual field school. And I'll physically be there, but everyone else will not be in Oregon. But we host field schools all across North America where students get exposed to public evangelism, which is why it's important for us that they learn transformational methods and not the bait and switch transactional methods. And we support pastors in evangelism training. We have initiatives in church planning. Dr. Anthony Wagner Smith leads our Acts cohort, which is an initiative to equip church planners for a more comprehensive, with a comprehensive support network. We have training for our lay members in discipleship and total member involvement in a Western context for the United States, Bermuda and Canada, Guam and Micronesia. And we work in tandem with NAD Ministerial. So I get to support the public evangelism efforts across North America. That's my particular role. And I hope I answered that. Basically, we support people becoming pastors, and we support the field specifically in evangelism and church planting.
Awesome. So a local church could call up NADI, could go to a NADI website or something and find some resources that can help them do what they're trying to do as far as evangelism.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, not only would you find resources, but we would be responsible for making sure we continue to support you. So whether that's in understanding the health of your church, natural church development, learning how we practice connection points, what I shared earlier. I posted it in the feed there. Understanding, being a part of a public evangelistic campaign that is in the framework of a larger, broader effort in ministry throughout your church and community. Connecting, I connect. One of my things that I really love doing, Anselm, is I love helping pastors learn how to pastor their community. And so I've connected a lot of pastors with their mayors, with their governors, with their federal representatives, their state representatives, county leaders. I teach them how to do that. And that brings me a lot of joy because that gets them out of a zone.
John, my wife just texted me. She said, "Man, John sounds just like you, man. You guys got to hook up."
I don't know. Your father married my parents, so there's a connection there. He gave an anointing that carried on to me, I guess.
All right. Good stuff.
But listen, to carry that on, one of our viewers asked the question: how can a local community connect with Natty to come in to do that kind of training? Is that possible? Is there a process? Do I need to get my firstborn?
I just posted the website in the feed. You're absolutely welcome to visit our website, nadei.org. You're welcome to send me a message. I'm putting my direct email in the feed. I'm happy to do that. And I particularly like going below into the southern states in the winter months. And so I'm happy to help in those ways. But not just us. We don't just come. We also take the whole network around North America and we build those bridges. One of my friends, he's in a regional conference and he wasn't aware of a significant church planting initiative for support. And I was able to connect him with that. And so we kind of take those resources and make sure everyone's aware of them and connected with them when we nurture the network of evangelism.
So to Denise Stokes, who just asked, have you ever been in the Western New York area to do training? I think what he's saying is if you move Western New York to Southern Florida, he's got you.
That's exactly what I'm saying. No, I have been to New York. I spent a lot of time in New York. Pastor Herody Thomas at Shiloh French is doing a phenomenal job in the Greater New York Conference. And we're supporting him in that His church has recently provided COVID-19 testing for free in the community. And how do you take this where we are and turn it into evangelism is the key. And that's what the Institute helps people do.
All right. So Gary, let's move here now. What you do at the Adventist Missions, Director of Adventist Missions, there's something very specific that I came across that you do some time ago, and it was so intriguing to me. We wanted to get you on to talk specifically about Adventist missions and centers of influence. I know we've danced a little bit around some of the concepts already, but just give us a breakdown. When we say, if somebody goes to the website and they see something about centers of influence, what are they going to see? What's the concept? How does it work?
Centers of influence is a term that's used today mainly in sales and marketing where it's talking about people who are good contacts. And Ellen White used the term more than 100 years ago, and she was using it in terms of, sometimes she was talking about people being a center of influence. She talked about Jesus being a center of influence. She talked about Satan being a center of influence. She talked about cities as being centers of influence. But she also talked about ministry centers that she called centers of influence. And so these are centers embedded in the community, in the city, that are there to be used as platforms to put Christ's method of ministry into practice. So she talked about things such as cafes, restaurants, reading rooms, whatever it takes to meet the needs of the community, to build bridges to the community. So today, when we talk about a center of influence, an urban center of influence, we're talking about anything that helps us build bridges into the community. It can be teaching English as a second language. It can be helping provide childcare for mothers in the area. It can be a juice bar. Whatever it is, you survey your community, find out what the needs are, and it's kind of like a starting point where you can actually minister to the needs of the community and put Christ's method of ministry into practice. And of course, a church can and should be a center of influence. Each of us should be a center of influence, but sometimes you need something outside the four walls of the church, because increasingly in secular and postmodern situations, people see a church and immediately the walls go up. These are the people who have all sorts of baggage that don't want anything to do with. And so this is kind of like a neutral territory where the church can be a minister into the community.
Okay,
So
let me stop you here, because I just want to be sure that I'm hearing you well and hearing you right. So you're saying that the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, that a lot of our members feel is out of touch and away from real ministry, where you're saying that the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, our church, our top body, is co-signing or good with using something like a restaurant as a form of evangelism or mission?
Not only are we fine with it, we encourage it.
What about a barbershop?
Wonderful, tremendous,
Car body shop.
terrific, fantastic.
Let's go, guys.
Are
Let's
there
throw some stuff at it.
Are there resources available from the General Conference to help out with these things?
Well, that's a very good question.
You go there.
That's a very good question, because
That's a good answer for that question.
yeah, because the Office of Adventist Mission, we care for the Global Mission Initiative, which is church planting in new areas among new people groups, and we see the challenge of the cities as one of our central mission challenges. We see centers of influence as one of the major tools to reach that challenge. And so, yeah, I mean, we go into partnership here in North America. We partner with the division, the unions, and the conferences, and we have helped start centers of influence across the country. Around the world, we have helped start dozens of urban centers of influence, not only financially, we do that, but also with the resources of personnel, with experience, etc., to help get them going. And so, yes, the resources are there, not as much resources as we would like, but in the past few years, we have invested several millions of dollars in trying to get urban centers of influence running.
I see comments. Somebody says, Don L. says a gym. What about a gymnasium? I'm assuming that's like a workout gym, a fitness center.
Yeah, I mean, in Thailand, we helped sponsor a climbing, those climbing wall centers.
Rock wall, okay, climbing wall.
Yeah. So a gym would be wonderful because it links in with the Adventist approach to holistic health.
Hannah Alexander asked, how about liquor stores as a center of influence?
It would certainly be a center of influence, but not the sort of influence that we promote.
Okay.
That's right.
All right. Glad to see we still have some orthodoxy. You promised us you would stay a little keep the heresy out of today. All right.
So that was a test for Gary.
Well, let's ask this question. How is there a way that the New Life congregation in a particular city, or maybe even the first SDA...
Oh, Roger Freeze. We got another Roger Freeze.
Roger, yeah.
So I think we were going...
congregation in the city can
Okay, Roger, you
to become a center of...
Let's help you out, Roger. Raj, hold on. Let's help you out, because you froze up there. So he's saying, how does New Life, how does First Church, generic church, anywhere where they are, how can they engage or become something like what you've talked about, or establish something like a center of influence?
Well, I think, first of all, they need to gauge what the community needs are. Then they need to make sure that the church is oriented toward outward thinking rather than inward thinking, mission rather than maintenance. And then they need to find out what sort of resources do we have within the church to help get this center going. It's no use starting a health center if you don't have any health professionals in your church. So you need to match the needs with the gifts and talents that God has given you. Then the best case scenario is that you find the resources within your own community to actually start it yourself. But if you need a helping hand with finances, then you talk to your local conference, and the conference may be able to help. And sometimes that they can actually reach out to the union, the division comes to the general conference, and as a partnership, we can actually help fund such a centre, and from the General Conference, we normally do it for the first 3 years, and after that, we expect that it will become self-sustaining. Now, of course, we don't expect that of all aspects of our ministry. And, for example, sometimes we'll have a line budget in the conference budget that will say this is for public evangelism. Why don't we have a line budget in the conference for influence? So I would say you need to create the vision, make sure that you have at least a pool of people who are interested to make it happen, pray about it, and start moving.
Okay, Gary, I think as more people get to watch this video and hear that, you're going to start getting a whole lot of calls and emails. I just want you to know, take mine first. My call, my email is going to come first with that. This is awesome. That's awesome. That's exciting to hear that there's so many variable ways now that our denomination is looking at doing evangelism, that it's not just an event, as we talked about earlier in the program. It's not just a Revelation seminar or a tent on the corner of Martin Luther King and 3rd Street, that it's tangible things that are real. And that's what we want to talk about as far as mission being real, evangelism being real, and touching people, moving people in real, tangible ways to take them along that journey to seeing and understanding and experiencing a relationship with God. I'm glad to hear that. Any other questions any of you guys have in regard to these centers of influence or even to Natty? Yes. Raj, are we?
What sources are available to help reason again?
Yeah.
Reason. What other resources are there out there that can help us?
Regarding centers of influence, if you go to urbancenters.org, that's urbancenters.org, then you'll find some more details about the program, at least from the General Conference. And so we have various resources available there. Then apart from that, I would call on Natty, just say, we're thinking of, we're wanting to change our approach here, that we want to have an outward mission to our urban community. How can you help us? I mean, Anthony can come and talk to you about starting new groups. How can you use a center of influence as a basis, as a platform for starting new groups of believers, people who may never come into the four walls of your church, but would be comfortable meeting to learn about the Bible in some sort of other non-threatening context, for example.
This is sometimes it's problematic to use examples from other countries, but there's one story that I think will be valuable to you as you frame what you're doing. There's a small city called Korenbong, and 100 years ago, Korenbong was a despot of alcoholism and abuse and violence. And the Seventh-day Adventist missionary that was assigned there, the work was so transformative that it changed it really into a small oasis. And while it now is insular because there's so many Adventists that are there, I think that the idea of a center of influence is captured really well in the book I just shared, Stories from Sunnyside, as you frame what's possible and what you can do in the city you serve.
Wow, that's very, very interesting. Let me ask this question, and we just appreciate this good information coming. I mean, people are going to be emailing your offices, wanting to get those resources so that they can start within their community a center of influence. How do you get started with this? If you're a person, a member that's watching right now, you're like, you know what? My city, what we need a restaurant in my city. And I want to connect with a different church. How would they get started with this?
Well, I think really you need to rely on church members who have a vision and are prepared to invest in it themselves. It's no good just floating a nice idea around. You actually have to have a group of people who are willing to say, we're going to own this, we're going to take responsibility for it, we're going to pray over it, and we're going to move forward in it. And, you use the example of restaurants, and it's a very difficult thing to run a successful restaurant today. I mean, it was difficult before COVID, it's 10 times harder now. So you need to really, really be careful when you move into that. So I would start asking questions of people who are already doing them. I think in Oakland, California, you have the Veg Hub run by Mr. Chu, CHEW. talk to him. What are the pitfalls? What are the opportunities? It may be better to start with something a little less complicated and just do a juice bar, for example. And one of the beautiful things that Ellen White taught was don't do big centers, one or two in a city. Do lots of small centers. So don't invest huge amounts of money into just one center. Make sure you have lots of smaller centers. So I would say get the vision, talk to your pastor. Pastor can talk the conference, make connections with our office through the division, whatever. There's plenty of people who are interested in this, who have had a lot of experience, who can give good counsel.
All right, I've got a question that pops up here that says, what about the fanatics that want to open a vegetarian restaurant and push the health message? What about those? I would say that's very mission oriented, not so much fanatical. But anybody want to take a stab at how would you respond to that question? What about the fanatics who would just want to open a vegetarian restaurant in a city where nobody's a vegetarian? I'm just making that up.
Well, for us, if we are going to give any money toward a project, we look at the business plan, we look at the goals, the objectives, we look at it very closely. So if you're going to be something that's on the extreme, that's doing unscientific, harmful practices, then we're not going to support it. We want it to be within the mainstream of this is good, holistic living within the Adventist health message.
Okay. All right.
I don't know if you can hear me now, but we have some folks who like the idea of something different, but the underlying is really I want to push the health message, or this is what I want to do to push this doctrine. The doctrine of getting the doctrine out is their motive. What are some of the things we can do to protect? As a American, they may not want to share their idea because they're afraid somebody might take it over and do something like that with it. What are some of the things we can, how are some of the things we can mitigate that?
I wouldn't want to mitigate that. That for me, I think that's what we're trying to do. There is a particular message or a particular thing that we are trying to get out there. So I guess I know you weren't asking me, so I should shut up. And but there's a part of that that I think is, and you guys who are watching today, when we have our little meetings, the three of us, we get to going back behind the scenes. We try not to do it in front of everybody, but that's one of those things that I would assume is part of, if it's part of the mission, if it's something tangential to the mission, then it is something that I would think that we would want to get out there. But as that question was not addressed to Pastor Paul, Pastor Boston, Pastor Krause, how would you address it?
Pastor Boston's been quiet.
Oh, well, I think Dr. Gary mentioned that you lean on members that have a vision, but your city and the region you serve will indicate to you how you need to approach ministry. The Spirit of God will reveal that to you by fulfilling a need. We were catapulted to become the spiritual leaders of the last city I pastored in, and it was because we decided to identify what the greatest need of that city was. And the need that we could meet. We can't satisfy all of the needs of a city. And in that city, childhood mortality was significant. And so we modified our children's Sabbath school initiative. We were in the pipe to begin the application process for Urban Center. We had only gotten to the division level. We hadn't gone on to the general conference level before I left to go to Australia. But I think that the significant thing about what we were doing there is that we became the spiritual leaders of the city. There's a difference between spiritual work or gospel work and social work. And any organization can feed people. Any organization can clothe people or provide support in meaningful ways, but the people of God are called to provide compassion and proclamation. And at the Evangelism Institute, that's something we focus in on. How do you exercise compassion and proclamation? Those two don't have to be separate. They shouldn't be divorced. And they're like the Daniel and Revelation of practice. And so the point that I'm making is that how do you identify? Let the city tell you its greatest needs. That could be a conversation. It could be a deep dive on demographics. It could simply be identifying what the needs are. But I do want to tell you this, and I don't want you to get in trouble. I don't want to get in trouble for saying it. But your church is not equipped to inform itself what the community needs.
Wow.
Exactly. We should as pastors be talking to the local police chief, the local community leaders. We should be asking questions. We should be finding out what the needs are. And what you say, John, is just so important. And a center of influence is not just a social welfare organization. It is a spiritual ministry. So the idea it is a platform for the entire combination of Christ's method. It provides a platform for the mingling, the showing sympathy, the ministering to needs, the winning confidence. And when you've won people's confidence, that's when it's easier to bid people to follow Jesus. Because when they ask you, why are you a Christian? Why are you doing this? Why do you believe? They've got nobody to blame when you answer except themselves, right? So it provides the context, the environment for a holistic ministry where we can bid people to follow Jesus. That's why for the ones that we help fund, we expect that there will be a plan to start new groups of believers out of the center. That has to be one of the goals. There has to be a plan in place to start them.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the challenges we face is if you approach a center of influence or you're approaching transformational evangelism, two separate ideas, but not necessarily on two different tracks. When you approach it, if you approach it with how much money do I need to accomplish it, you're asking the wrong question. Right. The right question to ask is what can I do with what I have right now? And if you're able to move the needle with what you have in your hands right now, the financial resources will only be fuel. They will not be the engine. You don't need the money to be the engine. You need the money as fuel. The engine needs to be built with what you have in place right now.
Wow.
Wow.
That was deep. I want to just go back a little bit. I was having some technical problems with the question. You talked about evangelism
Roger
being.
I'd like to take up a donation for Roger's internet.
That's a union.
I'm up in the mountains, so that's probably why.
Oh, I was gonna say that's union
But I don't know if you can hear me now. But we actually
yeah, Raj, we're not catching you, Raj. Send that to us in the text, and we'll ask it for you. Yeah. Natty, John, you might want to go ahead and send something down to his internet.
For evangelism, we want to make a contribution for evangelism.
Yeah.
All right, Raj, go ahead and text that to me, and I'll ask it.
Done a great job in the middle. We don't nurture them.
Right.
Is that possible? Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's not working.
I think too. I'm just going to throw this out. When you consider evangelism, man, and I'm really passionate about this, and I don't want to come across too strong. But what I find is that we measure ourselves oftentimes on what we cannot do, and we have to ask ourselves, what can we do? And I think, for instance, if you're in a rural church, and I used to pastor in Hemingway and Bucksport, South Carolina. I pastored in Milledgeville and Dublin, Georgia. My largest public evangelistic meeting was in a church that had 22 members because we decided together that we wanted to impact the city. So if you see your small church district as a limiting or mitigating factor to success, I want you to consider that the smaller the city, the bigger the impact you can have. So if you've got a rural or smaller region that you're serving, your capacity to change the game is off the charts. The larger the city, the more difficult it is to make the kinds of waves you want to make. So I want to encourage you as a pastor or spiritual leader, wherever you are, if you're in a small region and you're saying, I can't do that, that's too big, man, you are in the best, or woman, you are in the best place possible to make that kind of difference. And I would love to support you from the Institute if we're able to. And I'm sure that Dr. Gary would love to, even if it just means pointing you in a good direction. We want to support that.
Listen, I like this question. I like this question that Roger is asking. I think it deserves a conversation. You know, when we talk about evangelism, of course, people have these different definitions in their mind. You know, some people say it's public, some people say it's ongoing. But when we talk about evangelism, oftentimes we talk about outward, right? New people, getting new people in. But a lot of our members, they need nurturing, right? So what is the balance now between outward and nurture? Can I just say, let me just go out. Just go out. We need more people.
I got you.
But you got people in here. Does evangelism fit the member that is inside? What can evangelism do for that member?
And people will say, we can't go out there and do anything out there until we fix what's messed up in here.
That's a lie from the pits of hell.
Mercy.
It is.
Tell us what you really think, John.
That is Satan's attempt to keep us bound. We are people of freedom. We are not anchored to anything but the blood of Jesus Christ and his cross. And let me tell you something. This is my take on this. If you effectively go out to reach people, there is a great chance that you will nurture the spiritual growth of your members. But if you focus only on the members, there is a high likelihood you will not reach those on the outside.
Mercy.
So you balance it with mission.
Wow.
You may remember that there was an initiative that came out of the General Conference called Revival and Reformation.
Don't act like you don't remember the Reformation part, but Gary.
Revival and Reformation. Okay.
Oh, Reformation. I said reparation.
When I let me be clear. No. Now, when I first heard that, I got really nervous because revival and reformation can be very, very inward looking. Are we good enough? Am I reaching the right standard? Am I performing? What about this sin? Da 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 da. And growing up and going to an Adventist high school, I will remember the weeks of prayer and the soul searching and et cetera, et cetera. So for me, it had a negative ring about it. I felt a lot better about it when it started talking about revival and reformation for mission. I thought that was a really good improvement. But I would add that revival and reformation actually comes through mission. That's where it comes from, that we actually get engaged in service and mission, and as a byproduct, we ourselves are revived.
Wow.
I think that's an excellent point.
No, that's powerful. I think when you take that is huge, Dr. Gary. I love that, and I agree with it wholeheartedly. I think of a friend of mine. His name is Julian Johnson, and he works with the Advent Health Network in Central Florida. Brilliant pastor, leader, spiritual leader. But he provides support to physicians and nurses and health administrators. He built something called Built to Thrive. And he took his training as a chaplain and transformed it into a tool that can reach people that are not a part of a faith community.
Awesome.
So idea to action, your change, your choice. And I think that that's the principle that we have to exercise in our local churches. In our ministries, we have to ask ourselves, what can we do to impact the city that we serve? Our mayors need spiritual direction. Our chiefs of police need it. Our activists need to be brought together so that they can be anchored in precision impact and not just shoot all over the place. And I think that we have to provide that. And when we do that, we put ourselves in the position of spiritual authority. When I was in Columbus, Ohio, I was invited to be a part of the hiring team for the mayor's office. I was invited to work with the Pentagon and the Joint Civilian Orientation Conference, the 87th class. I was the faith leader for Barack Obama, President Barack Obama's task force on My Brother's Keeper. I'm saying that these things happened because we served our community well. Mm-hmm. And people flocked to the church because they were part of a place and a move. When we had our children's ministry, do you know who cooked the food for the children in the community? The community cooked food. The community did.
Yeah.
They saw our church as the center to volunteer. And I'm not saying that everything was peachy keen in my church. We had challenges, normal challenges, but we were just, I think by and large, that church was willing to deal with the pain of growth rather than the pain of staying where we were.
Wow. Wow.
But the challenge is, when we look at many of our urban churches, is that they are commuter churches. And so what happens is that people drive in to the church on Sabbath morning, they drive back out Sabbath afternoon, and the only thing that the local community knows is that there's less parking available on Saturdays. Yeah. That's all they know about the church.
And but Gary, we have to change that. We have to say, you know, urban centers across the country, say Detroit right now, they are seeing a revitalization of occupation. People are flocking to urban centers, gentrified buildings and high rises and lofts. And I think that we have to ask ourselves, why is the community growing and our church is not? That is because we cater to the members that drive in instead of the community that lives around us. And everything you do in your church should cater to the community. The first question is not what makes us happy. The first question is, what will it take to reach those people that are not here yet?
Amen.
I had a member say to me, she was the treasurer. She later was no longer the treasurer after this comment. But she said to me, the conference wasted our tithe. I'm so sorry that the conference wasted our tithe dollars on you. And I said, oh boy, why? And she said, because we didn't need a pastor for the community. We needed a pastor for us. And then I said, thank you, Jesus. It's a compliment. And so I'm saying, be the pastor for the community, but serve your members well. But your members should be seen as a part of the larger community that you're serving.
Wow. Listen, the things that you've been saying, we could generate a whole discussion. I mean, there's so many questions that's coming into my mind.
I feel like we're ready to get started now.
Yeah. How can we commute to church?
Oh, my mule.
Be an effective member of that church to serve the community. You know, so there's a lot of things coming. But listen, thank you so much for agreeing to be on this discussion today, because we got to make ministry real. I mean, that's what it's all about. I think we have gone past the place of just talking about church. Now we have to be the church and be real about it. And so, again, thank you so much to our guests for coming on. Thank you for the lively discussion. We definitely we got to have them back, Pastor Paul, Pastor Lee. We got to have them back.
Yeah, because there's a wealth of ideas and experience here with these gentlemen who have been around the world. They have seen things that are happening, and I know that many times our audiences get stuck. People in our local churches, if they just had some inspiration, then the motivation would come. And so John has put out some websites. He's put out some of the ones even for the missions. I want you to look at that Adventist missions website. There's videos and videos and videos of things that are happening in places all around the world. That I guarantee you, if you're watching today, you can go to the Adventist Missions website, you can go to Natty website, some of the others that John has put up, and you will get some inspiration. You might not want to carbon copy everything that you see, but you're going to get some ideas that will give you a jumping off point as you contextualize those things to your setting, to your communities. I believe God is waiting and longing to just do some awesome things right now in
Yes.
this context. I would love to have Dr. Henry. I'd love to have the guys to come back and to address even more specifically some of the things that again we're looking at in the South Florida. Probably January, February, March before we're opened back up. And when we open back up, it probably will be a very different setting and a very different world. How do we transpose some of the ideas and some of the things for what we've talked about today, whether they're centers of influence? How do you take some of those
Mighty.
hands-on, touchy-feely centers of influence and use them in a the kind of world that we expect we're going to see in 6 months from now? Will there be
That's
funding for
right.
those kind of things? Not just because the economy in North America
Well,
or around the world.
right.
Um,
Definitely. So listen. Thank you again. So next week, we're back on by the grace of God, and on the table next week, we are talking about what are we talking about?
oh man, what?
Ministry.
Yes. Oh, right. We're talking about ministry
Yes.
in the
In the
marketplace.
marketplace. That's
So
right.
this
In
is
the
tangential
marketplace.
to what we've talked about today. So we're going to be going ministry in the marketplace, and we're bringing ASI. ASI
Ooh,
is
yes,
going to be
sir.
with us, and so you're going to get some more hands-on or some more eyes on, or ears on in this case, ideas on what's happening as far as ministry in the marketplace. So we're excited about what's going to happen. I expect that there are some people who are alongside ASI are working probably along the same philosophical lines as what Gary you're doing with the centers of influence and what you're teaching there at Natty, John. So we're excited about what's going to happen next week, and you want to make sure that you are with us next week. Some of you
Make
don't know what
sure.
ASI is, though.
Yes.
They don't know what ASI is. That's another one
Right.
of our,
We're
our.
going to define that next week. Next
Okay.
week, we're going to define it for them. We're going
Okay.
to,
All right.
but
We'll
we
send you
have coming
another
on that
title.
show, Pastor Paul, on that show, we have coming on Philip Baptiste and
And
Mrs. Pat
Pat Humphreys.
Humphreys.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. And so we'll talk more about that. Listen, ministry at the round table, where we aim to help you have a very effective ministry, and we want to keep it relevant, we want to keep
Resourced.
it resource, and we want to keep it
Real.
Real.
real. Absolutely.
Pastor Wade is in my boat
God
where
bless
I
you
was
all.
last week. God bless you, everybody.
That's right.
Thank you.
All right.